he had the most dreadful war. First he was in slave labor camps. Later he has a Auschwitz tattoo. He was beaten. He was watched hangings. He was on the death march when, in the snow, he had already lost everything, and the camp that he was in was evacuated because the Russian army, they could hear the Russian army advancing, and so the Germans took them away from this camp, and it was winter and there was snow on the ground, and they were taken on this death march, and it was dusk, it was evening, and he realized that they were being taken somewhere, and the cart stopped, and the cart behind with the guns got out, and they saw there was a field, and they were being lined up against the wall, and he realized that they were all going to be shot. And there, suddenly, he says he doesn't know how he did it, but in the snow, he managed to jump over this wall, and he landed in a cemetery the other side, and he hid behind a gravestone, and he heard the praying, the screaming, the shouting, and then he heard the shots, and then there was silence, and then the last shots of people being finished off, and he lay there by a gravestone in the snow, having lost his clogs as he jumped over the wall, and he said he saw a German lean over the wall, and in the moonlight he could see him, but the German didn't see him. And there he was in Germany, in a strange place, all alone. And he said he slowly walked out of the graveyard he saw a little village road, and he walked along it, and there he saw that there were some scattered farmhouses, and he crept into an outhouse somewhere. And then he woke up and he heard shouting and screaming and a woman yelling, and then he saw the farmer with a pitchfork, and they called the village policeman. And then the policeman came, and he was an old man, and he handcuffed him, and he walked him, and he said, "Look, I know where the convoy went past," and he radioed them and said he was bringing this prisoner. And he said occasionally Germans left out water and occasionally even a milk churn for them, and the guards just kicked them over as they walked past. And then he said they were going to give them some soup, but before they got on these trucks, but he said he didn't have anything to put the soup in. He said the most precious thing you could hang on to was your plate and a spoon, and he'd lost those. And he said he saw an old tin on the ground with a hole in it. And he said he put his thumb inside the hole, and he managed to get some soup in this rusty tin with a hole in it, and drink this bit of soup. And then they went on, and he said when they got to Gross Rosen, which was a camp outside Buchenwald, and he said how the conditions were absolutely appalling, that the camp hadn't been finished. There was no glass in the windows. The snow came in. They were lying on the floor with one blanket under them and one blanket to share over them. He was so emaciated and such a poor state. And when they came in the morning, he said he couldn't believe it. Officer came with his jackboots and an Alsatian dog, and the dog just sniffed him, and the man just kicked him, and he couldn't move. And then he thinks because the war was so near its end that they just didn't want to do anything, and they left him lying there. The Germans came and said, "Out, out, you have to move, you have to go, we're leaving, we're evacuating." And he said people crawled out on their hands and knees, and he was so ill he couldn't crawl. He just stayed there. And they said, "We're going to burn the place down, you have to go." And he thought, well, what a time to die after all this. And there he was, and he couldn't move, and some other people couldn't move, and apparently those people who crawled out, hardly any of them survived because they were so ill, but there they stayed a couple of days, and then they heard noise and tanks, and American soldiers came, and there he was in a hospital, and he said what he'd suffered was just terrible malnutrition, and slowly he recovered, and they said that was the first time he ever cried. All those years he'd never cried, and then he cried because he realized that he had nothing. He lost his whole family. He had nowhere to go back to. He had no education. He said he had absolutely nothing. And he survived.